For me, an important part of degrowth or of degrowth research should be thinking about the drivers that cause economic growth, the growth of material consumption, material production, and these drivers can be called, we can speak about the growth imperative. Essentially, there is a sort of systemic pressure on growth which leads to ever-expanding production and consumption, and when it is coupled with the belief in free trade, it also leads to what we call the race to the bottom, which is essentially the dismantling of environmental, social rights, social conditions for workers and so on. And I think this is a very big problem, and it is caused by many factors, and one of these factors is also the structure of the enterprise, of the classical enterprise, which which actually is pressured to grow through its very structure. The shareholder, the share-owned company is pressured to grow because it must have greater and greater profit for its shareholders. The bigger it is, the better the value of its shares is, etc. So it often succumbs to the race to the bottom process, and this again is one of the drivers of the growth imperative. Therefore, I think it is important for people who are interested in degrowth to both take actively part in enterprises which are not standard enterprises, and to research them and to support them in many ways. Such enterprises are all around us, or such ways of provisioning are all around us. For example, it could be community-supported agriculture, credit cooperatives, all sorts of mutual organizations, people getting together mutually to do something, for a daycare center, for example. I think there are many and many. The commons can be also seen as a different kind of enterprise, and I believe these enterprises are crucial for degrowth, and they should be sort of studied, and we should find ways to support them. Many of these enterprises have a cooperative structure, a cooperative organizational structure, and I think this structure is useful as a degrowth, as a sort of for degrowth, or the structure of cooperatives is also useful for degrowth, in the sense that these cooperatives have certain characteristics different from the mainstream company. For example, they have the one member, one vote structure, and this means that the members can actually decide if the organization will go along the pathway of more profit, or if it will try to serve its members' needs or the needs of some other community, and still maybe try to make a profit, but it doesn't have to be the main aim. Another interesting aspect of cooperatives is the fact that they often speak that money is not a master but rather a servant in them. So this means that it is not, if your shares have a high value, it doesn't necessarily mean you will get a high dividend on these shares. The shares also, in many cooperatives, the shares don't increase in value with time or with the size of the company or with the success of the company. They remain, they have the same value, so if you take them out, you get the same amount of money that you put in. And again, this is against the growth imperative. So the cooperative doesn't have to grow. There's no pressure to grow in order to add to the value of the share. Shares in cooperatives are also not transferable. That means you can't really sell them to anybody outside the cooperative. And this again leads to a certain greater permanence, a different reason for members to become members, because they don't want to speculate. For example, they can't speculate with cooperative shares. So it's a more stable kind of ownership pattern, and quite often localized. The members tends to be local members, long-term members, and this again has impact on the aims of the cooperatives, on the way it thinks, or its members think about its long-term goals, because they're usually connected to their locality. So these would be some of the characteristics of these alternative economic spaces, as some social geographers call them, of these alternative economic geographies or social enterprises. There are many terms for the same, often the same entity. Maybe the last thing I'd like to say is we should also look at how these organizations survive in a very unforgiving global environment. I think one way to survive is to look for support for networking, support from their own umbrella groups, which can then supply them with what sometimes we call non-market capitals, in the sense, for example, they can get land at less than market rates from the local community or from their umbrella group. They can get expert advice at less than market costs. They can even have some kind of support from ethical banking organizations, some kind of secondary, we need some kind of secondary structures to enable the work of these organizations and to support them. We could continue speaking about this. We could speak about, for example, community markets, in the sense that these organizations can also turn to consumers who are not concerned only with price, who are concerned with quality, who are concerned with the locality where they live, support of the locality. So this would be another way to support these entities, these alternative economic spaces. And I think there are other ways, and I think people interested in degrowth should look at all these aspects and try to think of how such enterprises can be enhanced and supported.